Could you imagine having a nootropic as strong as Adderall, except as safe as coffee? What could you achieve? What would you achieve? And what should you achieve? That's what we're going to talk about in this video, the best Adderall alternatives. Firstly, we have to refine what we are looking for. So Adderall is a mixture of amphetamine salts, in that it's dextroamphetamine and levoamphetamine. It primarily acts as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, a dopamine releasing agent, a TAAR1 agonist, and it impacts VMAT2 and serotonin minorly. So we want to take compounds that will impact these pathways to mimic the effects of amphetamine as well. This is going to focus on the functional aspect of amphetamine, not the recreational aspect. I'm not going to lie to you either. I'm not going to claim like L-tyrosine, coffee, qualiamide, MyLab Pro, all of these supplements, nootropics under the sun is going to be able to replace your Adderall, because it's not. Even though some blog posts might claim otherwise, it's not. It might partially help, except it won't completely fix. I recently released a free ebook on 87 ways to increase dopamine, so check that out, link in the description. So the first replacement stack is cayuba bark and D-L-phenylalanine. So cayuba bark is such a weird herbal supplement. It's originating from the Amazon, which is going to be a hotbed of medicinal discoveries because of its insane biodiversity, and obviously a lot of medications are derived from plants or they're modified plant molecules. Cayuba bark is very interesting in that it's the best like for like herbal amphetamine, and definitely tailor your expectations because it's not as strong as amphetamine, except its mechanisms are very similar in that it's a dopamine releasing agent and a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, as well as being neuroprotective and doing a lot of other functions. So it's similar, except not exactly the same. Then I paired it with D-L-phenylalanine, which is an endogenous amino acid that converts into phenylethylamine, which acts as a TAAR1 agonist. So it can agonize the same receptors that amphetamine hits, which is really responsible for its pro-cognitive effects. And you can even take this a step further and combine this with a MAO-B inhibitor, so you can extend the effects of phenylethylamine on the TAAR1 receptors. The biggest problem with cayuba bark is, even though it's an amazing compound and there's a lot of applications and it seems so interesting, right now it's just tough to find a good extract that will deliver the promise that it's shown in studies. So that's something I've been looking into, and I haven't really found anything reputable or good. And if you're enjoying this video, please subscribe. Next is pregnenolone and triacetyleuridine. The name of the game here is striatal dopamine release, in that the striatum is a part of the brain that's very important for goal-directed behavior, and this part of the brain is very dysfunctional in ADHD, in that there's a separation between intention and action. So if you can take compounds that will evoke dopamine release in the striatum, you can make yourself very productive and proactive, and you can lower a lot of those primary ADHD symptoms. I definitely believe striatal dopamine release is the key to limitless motivation. If you look at any motivating compound, they all evoke dopamine release in the striatum, because that is a very powerful pathway for motivation. There's multiple ways to do this. One of them is to take pregnenolone, which is a powerful neurosteroid. Take it in a low dose that generally nudges your system in a hormonal and dopaminergic direction. Pregnenolone is very interesting in the fact that it increases your hormonal health, so testosterone, in that it's a precursor to testosterone, DHT. Testosterone makes effort feel good. Effort is just more satisfying, and it's more positively reinforcing as it increases cortisol. Cortisol can be good or bad depending on the level, except you need a little bit of cortisol to keep you motivated and to keep you on track. And interestingly enough, it is an NMDA receptor PAM, and those two targets are very good for cognitive enhancement. And pregnenolone is a bit interesting in that it's very polarizing, in that some people throughout its actions, because it can also act as a GABA-A PAM, feel very sedated and very sleepy when they take it, where other people, they feel very motivated and proactive. So, and it is personalization, polarization. It's amazing, and it is cheap. Next is triacetyleuridine, which uridine is a molecule we already consume in our diet. The good thing about triacetyleuridine is that it upregulates the dopamine D2 receptors, which are important for inhibitory control, as well as it modulates cholinergic usage. This combo is very effective and very cheap, and will work very well for people, especially people with ADHD. Phenylpiracetam, this is everyone's favorite racetam, in that it's a modification of the OG racetam, piracetam, with an extra acetyl group so it can cross the blood-brain barrier and impact catecholamine transmission, aka dopamine and norepinephrine, in that it's a reuptake inhibitor of both of those neurotransmitters, giving you a lot of pro-cognitive and pro-motivational effects. and it also affects dopamine release in the striatum. Are you noticing a trend here? As well as it also upregulates the dopamine D1, D2, and D3 receptor, which is kind of bizarre. This is another polarizing compound in that some people take it and they notice rapid tolerance with it, so they only take it once a week to maintain its effects. Other people take it every day in that they notice slightly diminished strength if they take it every day, except the overall effects remain consistent. So this is something that you're gonna have to tailor to yourself. It's tough to find the powder form at the moment. Cosmic Nootropic does have the pill form, as the hydrolyzed version of it is more GABAergic, which is kind of the opposite of what you want with phenylpiracetam, and the effects are stronger if you take it subliminally. PPAP, this is an atypical dopaminergic compound in that it is a Ka, so not a cat, in that it enhances dopamine's response to action potentials. So the same action will elicit more dopamine release than it usually would. So say you eat a sandwich and you'll get a 25% release of dopamine. Now with PPAP, you'll get a 40% release of dopamine, in that the same actions will evoke more dopamine release, so they can be more satisfying or positively reinforcing, which is what you want if you're, say, doing a bunch of boring, mundane work. That shines when it's taken with other stimulants, because it potentiates them and makes the effects a lot stronger, like dopamine reuptake inhibitors, for instance. And it just gives me a new mind when I take it. That's your hint. So the next stack is bromontane and N-acetyl-L-tyrosine. Bromontane is an atypical dopaminergic compound in that it doesn't increase the levels of dopamine. Instead, it increases the enzymes that convert amino acids into dopamine, enhancing your endogenous dopamine production. These enzymes are dopa decarbylase and tyrosine hydroxylase, so it's a very promising and interesting target in that way. Combining it with more amino acid precursors will result in increased dopamine levels. Tyrosine hydroxylase and dopa decarbylase are very much the gatekeepers, controlling how much amino acids is converted into dopamine, similar to bouncers at a club controlling how many guys get into the club to maintain the guy-girl ratio, in that they are the gatekeepers, so they increase the flow, enhancing our endogenous dopamine production, which is what we want, as well as some of the positive effects of bromontane last months after use, resulting in a semi-permanent effect. It also affects a lot of other ancillary targets like GDNF, GABA mediation, and antioxidant activity. Next is MODA, which I don't want to say its full name because I don't want this video to get demonetized, except this is a very popular like-for-like replacement for amphetamine, in that it's similar in its wakefulness effects, except surprisingly it doesn't really impact dopamine that much, in that it is a weak effect on dopamine compared to amphetamine's strong effect on dopamine. MODA mainly impacts histamine, in that it impacts the neuropeptide of orexin, in that it stimulates this peptide, causing a wakefulness response. Histamine, which you recognize for its ability to give you allergies, surprisingly is very important for your sleep-wake cycle. So by impacting this system, it can give you feelings of wakefulness, which is how MODA works. And there's modifications of MODA in that there's the FL versions, which are supposed to be better just with an extra chemical group. There have been numerous studies on it for its potential to improve cognitive function, especially when there is a sleep deficit. Even so much that US military gave it to their pilots on 18-hour flights so that they could remain cognitively sharp when they were sleep deprived. So if it's good for the US military, it's probably good for you too. Online Indian pharmacies are your friend when it comes to this compound. Celogene, this was Sam Bankman's key to riches and ticket to poverty, in that it is an irreversible MAO-B inhibitor, which preferentially breaks down dopamine and phenylethylamine. And Celogene in high doses also becomes a MAO-A inhibitor. This is a compound that requires some caution because it is an irreversible MAO inhibitor, in that you have to be careful of the cheese effect, in that consuming dietary amines like cheese itself, which contains amino acids like L-tyrosine, which is the precursor to dopamine. Because you eliminate the enzyme that degrades this amino acid, it can cause excessive catecholamine levels, which can lead to hypertensive crisis. So when you take Celogene, you have to be aware of this. The cheese effect is not an issue with a lot of herbal MAOs, in that they're often weak and reversible, except it is an issue with pharmaceutical MAOs, in that they're strong and irreversible. And the irreversible meaning of it is that it just takes 1 to 2 weeks for a new enzyme to be synthesized. So you have to wait for that period until a new enzyme is synthesized to get back to your regular diet. So this compound isn't for the faint of heart, except it might actually help your heart last a little bit longer, in that it's been shown in mice studies to increase lifespan by 34%, which is pretty insane, by increasing cellular apoptosis. by lowering the production of a toxic dopamine metabolite, dope out. So it's cognitively enhancing and lifespan enhancing. Interesting. Did someone say online Indian pharmacies, or am I just hearing things? Cilindrazone, which is derived from its parent compound, pimolin, which used to be on the tricycle to treating ADHD in the 60s to the 80s. It was prescribed very regularly, except all of a sudden there was isolated reports of liver damage, so it was withdrawn from the market suddenly, suspiciously, and serendipitously. And some modified forms of pimolin was cilindrazone, and it also has N-substituted derivatives, thiazolone and phenazolone. Unfortunately, with this compound, it's not the most well-researched stimulant, so you do have to use it at your own risk. The interesting thing about it is that it increases catecholamine reuptake, except doesn't really impact the adrenal system, which is fairly rare. What this means is that you don't have an elevated heart rate or anxiety like you typically do with stimulants, so that makes it a very promising candidate. It is the long forgotten amigo for treating ADHD. Evidence for liver damage is weak at best and terribly misleading at worst. So these compounds are amphetamine analogs. So instead of drinking apple juice, you're now drinking orange juice. Different, but both sweet. And that is the idea here. I'm not recommending these compounds, nor am I advocating for their use. I'm merely just giving you the information so that you can make your own decision. Not that I'm advocating for you to make that decision. As well as drugs aren't bad. Drugs are tools. Drugs are neutral. If you look at a hammer can be used to build a house or break a skull, in that it's a neutral thing, except it can be used in different ways depending on the intention. And drugs are the same thing in that the intention matters. Even look at methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is still a prescribed drug, surprisingly under the name deoxin, at doses of 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams, except it's also a recreational drug smoked at 300 milligrams, except there's a difference between a prescribed medication at a low dose compared to an illegal drug at a high dose, except even though that it's the same compound, this makes a massive difference. So these amphetamine analogs always come up in the research chemical Reddit, in that if you browse through it, you'll see raving reviews about their effects, and that they're very functional, not recreational, and that's really what you want. Commonly chemically compared to Vyvanse, except with an extra fluorinated group. So similar to amphetamine, and no reason to suggest more neurotoxicity than amphetamine, except we just don't know because they are research chemicals, and there's not a lot of research on them whatsoever. The whole point of this is that I'm just reinforcing the fact that the dose makes the poison, not necessarily just the poison itself. Harm reduction practices are crucial with these compounds so that you err on the side of caution and don't become an airhead yourself. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at these honorable mentions ranked from weakest to strongest. It's tough to perfectly mimic amphetamine because that would just be amphetamine itself, except we can get 80 to 90% of the way there. There was a reason you stopped taking amphetamine, and I'm assuming that was a fairly strong reason. So using these nootropics that I mentioned in this video can be of great use to you. Dopamine is like a bag of cats, in that sometimes it's tough to gain control of. So I made videos on dopamine in the past, and even a dopamine masterclass, so check out that video if you're interested.